I am just going to carry on. So you probably, many of you know me, I am Audrey Wilson, the Partnership and Engagement Manager at Scottish Council and Archives. Some of you may know me from the conference. Last week we organised during COP26, Sustainable Stories Capturing an Age of Change in Community Archives. So today's event is part of our response to the climate emergency. But just a few housekeeping matters before I carry on. So this is a Zoom meeting and we are recording the session. Could you please remain on mute, but if you like, turn your video on. Use the chat room to place comments and any questions, and feel free to answer other people's questions, but just always remain respectful. So at the end of the talk, I will ask questions and if appropriate, ask people to raise their hand virtually and they can unmute and ask the speaker a question. So Visions of Climate Heritage is an online competition that has been developed by Historic Environment Scotland in partnership with the Heritage Trust Network and the Scottish Council on Archives. And links will be posted in the chat room, which will give you more details about the competition. Just very briefly, the entries must align with one of three themes. The past was a different place, this is an emergency, and a greener future. Images can include a historic photo that illustrates a less informed time before we first learned about climate change and began to see its impact. A moment of extreme weather, whether it's becoming, something that's becoming more common in Scotland, and the impact it brings to our homes, the streets, our natural heritage. Or it could be a creative artwork, such as a painting or a sculpture, which showcases a green, low-carbon Scotland. There will be £750 in prizes available across three categories, which includes Best Photograph, Best Mobile Photograph, Best Artwork, and Young Creative Awards for those aged between 12 and 17. And images will be judged on their ability to tell a story, as well as their visual interest, impact, and relevance to the historic environment and climate change in Scotland. The competition will close on Tuesday, the 30th of November, with the shortlisted and winning entries forming part of an online exhibition. So today we hear from Blake Milteer, Curator of the MacKinnon Collection. That's a collection of over 15,000 photographs dating from the 1840s through to the 1950s, I think. The MacKinnon Collection was jointly purchased by the National Galleries of Scotland and the National Library of Scotland. Blake Milteer has been the curator of the MacKinnon Collection since June 2018, and before this, he was the photographic collections curator at the National Library of Scotland. You may notice Blake's American accent, and before he was working at the National Library of Scotland, he was the museum director and chief curator at the Colorado Springs in the United States for 9 years. So in this 20-minute talk, Blake will provide a view of the past to inform the future by using examples from the MacKinnon Collection into how Scottish life and identity has changed and transformed in the past 100 years. So we hope Blake's talk will inspire you to take part in the Visions of Climate Heritage crowdsourced competition. Over to you, Blake. Thank you.
Thanks, Audrey. So I have a PowerPoint. I will share my screen here. And let's see. Great. Hopefully everyone can see that. Audrey or Rachel, maybe if you could shake your head and let me know you can see it all right. Excellent. Yes. Excellent. Great. Just starting off with an image to get us going here. This is sort of a ride your bike to work day. 19th. The MacKinnon Collection is an unparalleled collection of photographs amassed by one man, Murray MacKinnon of Aberdeen, over more than 4 decades of his life. The MacKinnon Collection includes more than 14,000, probably closer to 15,000 photographs in total. And its quality, 2013 MacKinnon sold the collection on, and in 2018, the collection was jointly purchased by the National Galleries of Scotland and the National Library of Scotland, with support from the National Lottery Heritage Fund, Scottish Government, and the Art Fund, effectively saving this resource. Was interested in Scottish life and Scottish identity and achievement from the 1840s through to the early 1950s. This is, of course, the height of the Industrial Revolution, and also, and not insignificantly, the first century of photography itself. To launch this collection to the public, the National Lottery Funds in particular covered part of the purchase, but also a 3-year project in which a curator, myself, would be hired to oversee a number of aspects that will get this collection going. First of all, we're cataloging the collection, each and every one of those 14 to 15,000 photographs. We're digitizing every individual photograph, as well as full pages of the 140 or so bound volumes in the collection. We held 2 exhibitions here in Edinburgh in late 2019, early 2020, one at the Portrait Gallery, one at the National Library. We're touring the collection to 3 venues across Scotland, and ultimately the collection will be available online in digital form on both the National Galleries and the National Library's websites. So just to look at a few of these aspects in greater detail, the Portrait Gallery, which is where I'm sitting today in the library at the Portrait Gallery, was essentially an overview, a survey of the collection. It included more than 200 photographs in the exhibition. The much smaller, but just as consequential exhibition at the National Library focused on Scotland's coasts and waters in celebration of the Year of Coasts and Waters, and looked at that theme within the MacKinnon Collection. The tour, we looked at 3 regions that we wanted to make sure we touched upon: Southwest, Highlands and Islands, and Northeast. We're working with Kirkcudbright Art Gallery, Museum Nan Elan, and Duff House. The tour, which was postponed by the pandemic, had to be rearranged from the order that you see here, and we ended up starting the tour at Duff House this past September, where it's in its last week before it moves on to Kirkcudbright, opening in the middle of December, and then Stornoway April through to June of next year. So hopefully, if you didn't catch the exhibitions here in Edinburgh, or even if you did, hopefully you can catch them in one of these other wonderful sites. Especially over the past year and a half, we've engaged in online activities to engage the public in aspects of the MacKinnon Collection. Starting during the NLS exhibition here, we launched the website From Shore to Shore, which is on National Library's platform, which looks at, again, aspects of Scotland's coasts and waters as represented in the MacKinnon Collection through various activities, from geo-referenced points on the library's wonderful maps collection, showing where some of these MacKinnon Collection photographs were made, and the National Gallery's websites. We've done a number of blogs looking into various aspects of the collection, as well as started publishing individual photographs online a little over a year ago, and they're just over 550 photographs available for viewing in high resolution on the gallery's website now, with at least 100 more being added each month. So that's very much worth exploring. And so what I wanted to do today is look at specifically the way that the MacKinnon Collection photographs and some of the subjects in the collection can touch upon many of the climate change issues and initiatives that we're currently talking about. And I want to start with this one from George Washington Wilson, the Stones of Stennis, from about the 1880s. This is mainland Orkney. This is a 19th century photograph, and of course we're looking at a time then in which many of these places were being photographed for the very first time. And more significantly, these are the first time that many people will have seen these places in any manner that resembled the way our eye might see it. So it was a new and exciting kind of venture introduced by photographers like Wilson for a growing tourist industry. Photographers like Wilson and his main competitor, James Valentine, favored ancient sites like this and other kinds of historic sites around Scotland as representation of our history. But this is a history that's of course endangered as with climate change. We see sea levels rising, and on the right from the Coastal Risk Screening Tool on Climate Central's website, by 2050, we can see the sea level rising to a sufficient level that will in fact engulf the Stones of Stennis, which we can see right here. Nearby Ring of Brodgar, even though it's shown as being above the water level here, the map calls to attention the fact that many of these sites, A, are coastal in their siting, and B, that it's not only water levels that we'll have to be concerned about as climate changes, it's extreme weather and erosion that will affect many, many, many of these ancient sites in negative ways. And so these are sites that we'll have to pay attention to with great intensity, I think, in the future. Valentine, I mentioned as Wilson company based in Dundee, the observatory on the top of Ben Nevis. There's the observatory on the left and the beginnings of the hotel there on the right. And Ben Nevis, of course, is a site that we've seen its usage change dramatically over time. Here with the weather observatory, rather than an astronomical observatory, it was set up to observe the extreme weather that happens and record the extreme weather that happens on top of Ben Nevis. The observatory closed in the early 20th century. It's just a ruin now, ruin of the stone buildings. The hotel, which opened in 1885, also closed in the 20th century, but early on, we can see this combination of scientific endeavors and recreation taking place on Ben Nevis. In fact, there are a couple other images in the MacKinnon collection of early automobiles on top of Ben Nevis. So there was the ability to drive up to the summit at some point in the early 20th century. Now, of course, walking is the primary means by which one would get to the top of Ben Nevis, but the numbers of people annually traveling to the top have caused great erosion in the paths and the trails. This summer there was, I think, a great initiative by the John Muir Trust to restore many of the trails there, but it's an ongoing concern, even with activity that we would normally think of as being fairly low impact. But this is also one of the most popular sort of nature-based sites in Scotland as well. So, MacKinnon Collection, this calls to attention some of the issues that we're looking at as we catalog the collection. When we first opened this photograph, opened the envelope that contains this photograph, photograph, there was an inscription associated with it that identified this seaweed as Ettrick Bay on Bute. So that's, as we do, that's what we documented initially. But as I looked into this photograph and started to try to discover the exact site, as I have done for many of the photographs in the collection, it did not ring true in terms of the landscape I saw represented in the image with the images I'd seen of Ettrick Bay in Bute. So spent some months not knowing exactly where this is, even with some fairly intensive searching as to where it might be. And it wasn't until late last year when I was up in Gairloch in Wester Ross and at the wonderful museum there that I saw a didactic on the wall that had this very same image with a slightly different title, but identified this as Grinyard Bay, which is just north of Gairloch. So with a little bit of contact with a local, someone who grew up near there, we identified the exact spot where this was taken in the early 20th century, paid a visit ourselves, my wife and I, and here it is last April. A little bit different time of day, probably different time of year, different tide than the original image, but there it is. And it's one of the pleasures, I think, in exploring an historic collection like this is sort of then and now capacity and being able to relate them to our own lives now. So Grinyard is an interesting place. Just to the left, outside the left-hand edge of both of these photographs is Grinyard Island. And in 1942, Grinyard Island was the site of biological warfare tests involving the island for most of the 20th century. It's still off limits, primarily on a recommended basis, even today. So these crofters in the early 20th century, as they gathered seaweed, would not have undoubtedly had any idea that the island that they probably looked at every day would be used. Landscape of that island damaged in such a significant and lasting way. James Valentine, whose company we Ben Nevis, was the main photographer for the first Tay Bridge. And the image on the left is the bridge from 9 in completion. And then on the right, an image of the bridge after the 1879 disaster, in which a section of the bridge collapsed and a train crossing plummeted into the Tay, killing approximately 7. Interestingly enough, the image on the right that we're seeing is a postcard from the early, though they depicted terrible things and events with terrible consequences, were considered viable for commercial implications, even in a postcard here. But I think a far more interesting and in a way effective image related paper is this one by Unknown, and you can see the title there at the bottom. It sort of in a way that counters our expectation of photography to depict something, a subject, a particular event, particular people. This represents the Tay Bridge disaster in a much more abstract and I think elegant and profound way. So in the center here, we're seeing a diamond shape of ticket stubs that were relinquished by the passengers at the station before the train left departed to cross the bridge. In the corners are 4 carte de visite images of passengers or crew, perhaps on the train. But you have to think that at this time, when this was made in the 1880s, this was a time before everyone saw themselves represented in a photograph. Photography was becoming more affordable to most people at that time, but it was still a time when many people had never had a photograph made of themselves. And so whoever made this image possibly wasn't able to obtain photographs of all the passengers or enough of the passengers to make a composition that would resonate here. So we see him, presumably him, possibly her, using the last items, some of the last items that changed hands from these passengers before they perished on the train. And so in a way, this image becomes exactly what's described in the title, Memento Mori, a remember of the transience of life. And in the way that painters had used for centuries before, these recognizable objects stand in this case, for the lives lost in the disaster. And the last image that we'll look at in depth here is John D. Stevens' Dawn of Light and Liberty. This was Murray MacKinnon's favorite photograph in the collection. And he and I talked about this several years ago, or a few years ago. And this is one of the few photographs in the collection that's identified by the photographer's name and the title on the print, on the photograph itself, handwritten by the photographer in a way that we would expect of a work of fine art. And so this is a hand-colored black and white photograph, hand-colored gelatin silver print from about 1908. And this is an image that, not dissimilarly to the Tay Bridge image that we just looked at, is meant to represent something rather than just depict something. And here, with this image of these milk boys on their morning deliveries in Aberdeen, this is, hence Murray MacKinnon's specific interest in it, being a resident of Aberdeenshire. Here they're walking down the road on their morning deliveries, seemingly overseen by this statue on the right, which is a depiction of William Wallace. And so what we have is an image that suggests the themes of liberty, as the title would have it. Light is, of course, a significant part of this image. This is dawn. So the dawn of light and liberty, hand-colored to drive that effect on home for viewers. And so here these milk boys are off on their morning deliveries with Wallace in sort of the pose of the orator, right? The Roman orator, effectively bestowing upon these youth the responsibilities that will come as they launch off into their lives and their work in the attainment and sustainment of liberty. And this is an interesting image, being Aberdeen. This is a time, of course, too, when this kind of activity would have been probably a primary aspect of many people's lives. And of course, today, when we think of Aberdeen, we think of university life, of course, but also a significant aspect being the oil industry. And so it's hard to look at an image like this in terms of contemporary Aberdeen and not think of that aspect of the Scottish economy that drives, in fact, much of the world and much of our daily lives. Oil being in everything, oil being part of, well, in Stephen's time here, not only the camera he used and the construction of the camera he used, but also probably the celluloid negatives that he was using. And in our lives, well, oil enables the very thing we're doing today, does it not? It's a significant aspect of the computers that we're all sitting in front of, or the phones that we're sitting in front of, and something that's been discussed at the conference over the past couple of weeks as well, in terms of a sustainable industry and part of course, Scottish economy in a significant way. And I thought I would end on a bit of a high note here, as far as I'm concerned. This is Ben A, pictured from Kinlochhew. This is Wester Ross. And what we're seeing behind that home there is the Ben A range. And this is a success story, I think, in terms of conservation. Ben A is the UK's first nature reserve, first national nature reserve, created in 1951. So it's having its 70-year anniversary this year. And so essentially the 48 square kilometers around that mountain in the background have now been set aside as protected. And this area includes ancient Caledonian forest all the way up to essentially alpine tundra on the mountains. It is one of the most wonderful places to visit if you've never been. So I thought I would end on that high note before we'll take questions. So I'll just stop sharing there.
Yes, I have to say, I've not put my video on yet, but I think everyone's having issues with their Wi-Fi, and so I hesitate slightly to put my video on, but I'm going to try it to see if anyone has got any questions. There were some interesting points in the chat room, but I have got written down some questions that people have asked me to ask you. I'm going to start my video, actually. Might help. To ask you, Blake. There was a thing about, actually, it's quite surprising that the person who collected all these images is still alive. That's a terrible thing maybe to admit, but could you tell us a little bit about him, the person, Murray MacKinnon?
Yeah, Murray owned a chain of chemists, pharmacies around Scotland. That was his primary focus for most of his life, but started, I think he had a young interest in collecting photographs and began in the, I think, late 70s, early 80s, collecting intensively. Started small, as most collectors will, and started with a group of photographs that was primarily that primarily depicted Aberdeen, and it grew from there.
Okay. Another question actually I have received is, where are they currently stored? Because it's jointly owned, are they in both sites? Are they at the National Library of Scotland as well as the National Galleries, or are they in one place or another? Currently,
most of the photographs are stored at the National Library. But as we catalog them, we're cataloging them here in the library at the National Portrait Gallery. So we routinely transport photographs over here to catalog and digitize. Then they go back over to NLS. But probably by early 2023, late 2022, early 2023, when the collection goes online, both the catalog records and digitized images, and on both the National Galleries and National Libraries websites, you'll not only be able to access those high resolution images online, but you will be able to consult the actual photographs in person, if desired, which I would also highly recommend. There's nothing like seeing the photographs in person, being able to handle the photographs, see them up close, feel the different kinds of materials and papers, and be able to spend that time with the actual photographs, which you'll be able to do at either the National Library of Scotland or the National Portrait Gallery here. The way it will probably work is that when you look up a particular photograph online and book a reservation to see it, you'll be able to see at that point which location that particular image lives at that point, and that's where you'll go to view it. Yeah.
Well, great. Two questions have come up, and I didn't ask the one that came in afterwards. There is a question here, and it says there was the picture with the boys from Aberdeen. What were they carrying? Do you know that one?
Yep. They're carrying, the milk bottles. Milk bottles. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. That's quite a few people have been asking that question. That's great. A sort of slightly technical question from Jason Gilchrist is, can you give us an insight into the digitization process, the system to process is such a large and historic collection? Where was the starting point, and when's it going to be complete?
Well, we had the great advantage when we began this project in terms of both the cataloging and the digitization that Murray MacKinnon was highly organized. He didn't catalog each individual photograph in his collection. Rather, he grouped them into thematic or subject-based groups, which he would place in archival sleeves within archival boxes. And he numbered those boxes from 1 on up. So box number 1 might be Glasgow. In fact, box number 1 through about box number 7 are Glasgow. And they'll contain photographs of Glasgow from throughout that entire century. There might also be boxes of subjects like sport, subjects like rural life, hotels, I think, is a box. So they're all the representative of all the different subjects in the MacKinnon collection. And so essentially when we started with box 1. And are working our way through it. And so the process that we've developed, and part of this is a necessity based upon technical aspects of the project, and also sort of the collaborative spirit between the National Galleries and National Library. We're cataloging them first. Those catalog records are entered into the database. Then the photographers here at the National Galleries create batches based upon that order of objects already entered into the database. And so the digitization follows from the cataloging in order in which the items were cataloged. We're essentially photographing with a camera all of the physical photographs. By the time we get to some of the negatives and lantern slides and that sort of thing in the collection, we will undoubtedly, we'll probably scan most of those rather than photograph them. So same thing at the National Library, where I think, as I mentioned, they've just finished photographing all of the bound volumes. The printed books and the photographic albums at page level. And again, photographing those on a copy stand, essentially. So what we're doing is high resolution images that you can zoom right into. So I encourage you to get a sampling of what we're doing. You can go onto the National Gallery's website. I think the easiest way to access the images there is in the search box at the top of the homepage, just type in MacKinnon, and what you'll get is essentially all of the MacKinnon material on the website that includes all of the blogs and exhibition pages and that sort of thing that we've done. But you'll also see a link to the individual images in our collections pages, and you can kind of browse through those. You can look by individual photographers' names if you know them, or subjects. Sometimes if it's represented in the title, or just do what I like to do, browse through the images and see what strikes your fancy. And then you can zoom right into those images. And this has helped us tremendously. We ran without getting into too much more detail and extended discussion here, early on in the first lockdown for the pandemic, we ran a really interesting and effective project on social media in which we took some of the unidentified subjects in the MacKinnon collection and put them online for the public to help us identify the subjects. And it worked beautifully. And so we've been able to change some of our catalog records from unidentified sites to something that's actually named, often identified by someone who lives right there and was able to look out their window and confirm that this is that place. So we wouldn't be able to do that without these great digitized images and being able to zoom in and see some details on them. And this will help us again when it comes to over probably a longer period of time trying to identify some of the people in the photographs especially.
I may have just one really last question actually, and it was a sort of point that was raised by Graham Fraser, and it was talking about the chemistry of the photographs. And my background is in conservation, so I know there's probably a lot of different photographic processes in the MacKinnon collection. Could you just give some sort of an oversight of that? I mean, do you know how many approximately during that period of time that are covered?
Well, almost every photographic process that was introduced between the 1840s and the mid-20th century are represented in the collection. So the earliest photographs will be from the early 1840s. So this is within just a few years after photography was first introduced to the world in 1839. So we'll have some early daguerreotypes. We'll have some early salted paper prints. There's one Hill and Adamson calotype negative in the collection as well. And this is especially significant with the National Gallery sort of being the international home for Hill and Adamson photographs, with over 6,000 in the collection. We have ambrotypes. We have just a handful of ferrotypes, tintypes in the collection. Most of the work from the 19th century are albumen prints, but then we have gelatin silver prints in various forms, all the way to early 20th century gelatin silver print postcards, which were hand printed postcards. There are glass plate negatives from the 19th century in the collection, as well as a few celluloid negatives from the early 20th century. I think I mentioned lantern slides, a couple hundred lantern slides in the collection, as well as a handful of autochromes, early color process. Yeah.
Gosh, no, thank you. And I'm going to sort of finish there because we are sort of over time anyway. People can contact you by email if they want to. I don't know if that was on one of your slides actually, Blake, but they can always contact Scottish Council and Archives and we can pass on your details to anyone as well. I just want to say, I'm just looking, don't want to miss anyone out, but I just want to say thank you very much. And thank you for everyone attending this, because we just did it very sort of last minute as well. So I think the people that are here are genuinely very, very interested in the MacKinnon collection and will be looking forward to coming and seeing it when it's all available online. So thank you very much.
Good.
Round of applause. You can use the reaction button at the bottom of your screen if you want to clap. Great. Oh, thank you. You can see them all popping up there. Great. Keep up to date with what we're doing by following us on Twitter at Scots Archives or at SCA Archives Scot, and you'll find out all the different things that are going on. Okay, thanks everyone. Bye.